Hello board game brothers and sisters, I'm Adam Singer and welcome to another episode where I'll be letting you know of all the board games launching on Kickstarter and GamePound over the next week. And if you're new to the channel, we do this every week going over all the upcoming campaigns, so if you want to stay up to date, this is definitely the place to be. But before we get started, I do like to go over some new announcements and discoveries that I just found out about. And for the first one here, we do need to play a little bit of catch up because I did announce last week that there would be a new expansion coming this month for the game Terraforming Mars. But I didn't realize it was actually going to be launching in the very first week, and they did go ahead and do that. Sometimes I just don't get enough warning on these things, but I did want to let you know that this one launched because it's a hugely popular game. And this one's going to be adding a few new expansions. The biggest one I would say is the Prelude 2, which is going to be adding a bunch of abilities and starting resources, just like the original Prelude did, but it's going to be adding a few new mechanisms as well. I personally think that's one of the best expansions because it does speed up the game, and it also creates some special abilities that will change the way that you play the game from game to game. But this is also going to be adding a bunch of new boards and different modules that you can include into the game if you want to do so. It also has an autonoma if you want to be able to play this solo. And it is also going to be introducing a bunch of component upgrades, which are always nice to have. It does look like this one is limited to the new expansions, and it's not going to be offering any of the previous content or the big box solution that was offered a couple years back. But if you are interested in that, I might consider selling mine because I do not play this game very much. Or if you have a pledge for Castles of Burgundy that you're trying to get rid of, this is a campaign that I thought I backed, but it turns out I only followed it and I never actually pledged for anything. But I really do want a copy of this game, especially with the acrylic tiles and the playmat. So if you do have a pledge that you're trying to get rid of, I'd probably buy it off you or trade my Terraforming Mars for it. I am located in Canada, but I have no problem shipping to the US. I've done it a ton without any issues at all. But if you are also located in Canada, this could be a really good opportunity because it is always harder to find these secondhand pledges on the secondhand market. So if you are looking for a copy of Terraforming Mars, I do have the all-in pledge. And you can just email me at adam@shelfclutter.com if you want any more details. But I didn't mean for this to just turn into a whole buy and sell video. I just really want this game, but let's move on to the next announcement. And that's that there is a new game announced by Stonemaier Games. This one's not going to Kickstarter, but I thought I'd still mention it just because I know a lot of these Stonemaier games tend to get a ton of hype, and I know a lot of the community is interested in them. This one actually looks like a ton of fun because it is a worker placement game where players are going to be controlling their super intelligent bee species out in space. I haven't had a chance to look into this one too much beyond that just yet, but I'm sure there'll be a ton of content on this from other content creators if you just go ahead and search YouTube after you watch this video. And speaking of other content creators, I always do like to give a quick shout out to Alex over at Boardgame Co. because him and I do work together to keep track of all these different campaigns, and we do update each other so that I can put out these videos for you each and every week with all the most updated info as possible. But then he also puts out a video at the start of each month, letting you know of all the campaigns we know about at the start of the month. Alex also puts out a ton of other content, and he's always experimenting with new types of content. Him and Meg actually just put out the first video to a brand new series called That Is the Question, where they go over a bunch of questions regarding the games from Alex's to back or not to back video. If that sounds interesting to you, definitely go ahead and check out the video because I'm sure they'd love to hear any feedback that you have to give, what you liked about it, and what you think could be improved so that they can make each video in the series even better than the last. But I'm going to do my best here to make sure that this video is not another 1 hour episode like the past couple of weeks have been. And we do have quite a few games to cover, so let's just get straight into it and let's check them out. And the first campaign we have launches on September 11th. This one's called From the Earth to the Moon. And this plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 30 to 45 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive roll and write game where players are going to be competing to build a giant cannon in order to launch themselves to the moon first. In order to fully complete your cannon, you're going to have to fill in all the cells for the 4 different components that make up your cannon. There's the cannon base, the cannon itself, as well as the gunpowder and the bullet. But just building your cannon does not actually guarantee you a win because there's also all these different stars that players are going to be filling in throughout the game. And it's going to be the player who completed their cannon but also has the most stars filled in that's going to be the winner for the game. Obviously, there's a ton of other grids that players can fill in as well, and each grid's going to be associated with a different icon. And players are going to be trying to gain resources of that specific icon in order to spend it to fill in cells of the associated region. Some of the cells that you'll fill in can also have different icons that immediately grant you resources, which can immediately allow you to fill in a cell in a region that matches that resource. This is going to allow all sorts of chaining effects, allowing you to fill in all different areas of your board, even in a single turn, but these can also grant you coins that you can go ahead and spend at the shop in order to make different upgrades to your production, because this is one of the main ways that you're going to be gaining resources throughout the game. But the other main way that you're going to be gaining resources is through the resource cards, because at the start of each round, there's going to be a bunch of resource cards out on the table, and players are just going to be taking turns drafting those resource cards. You'll be able to take those into your hand and then spend them in order to gain the resources that are outlined on the card. Players will then go top to bottom through the different grids on their production line, activating each of them and gaining an amount of resources depending on how much they were able to upgrade that specific row in their production. Players can just go straight ahead and spend those resources to fill in the various areas on the board, but there are also some other special areas where you can convert resources into other resources. Make bets if you think that you'll be the first player to complete one of the 4 specific components of the cannon, and if you are correct, you'll gain a victory point, but if you're incorrect, you'll gain a resource. Then there's also a section that allows players to duel, and whenever you do this, you're going to be drawing one of these cards, and whichever card is revealed, whichever player is furthest ahead on that specific resource or component or area that it's indicating, then that player is going to be the one that wins the duel, and they'll be the one that gains the benefit. Each player is also going to be playing as a specific character that they would have picked at the start of the game, and this is going to grant players with some starting resources that will vary from their opponents, and it also grants each player with their own specific special ability. The game continues like this over a number of rounds, and if the players are able to complete their cannons, then the player that has the most stars wins the game, and if you're interested in this one, you can check it out. I have it linked in the description below. And one thing to note with this is that it is a print and play, which means that it's going to be very affordable. For just $4, you can both support the creators as well as get a copy of the files into your hands. And the next campaign is going to be launching on September 12th, and this one's actually going to be offering you 2 different trick-taking games. Both these games have been previously released, but these new versions are going to be offering you updated artwork, as well as some variants to play the games a little bit differently with their existing player counts. But in the case of Haggis, there's also going to be a variant that allows playing with up to 4 players. Haggis does feature the climbing style of trick-taking, which means that the first player is going to be able to play either any card that they want, or they could also play different types of sets, and the sets that are allowed in this game are to play any amount of cards that are matching number, or if you have cards that form a run, so that means that they're sequentially increasing, but then they also have to be matching the same suit, then you can play those as well. But whatever cards that player decided to lead with is going to be setting the precedence for the rest of that trick, because all the players that follow after that are going to have to play the same style of set, but it's also going to have to be with cards of higher values because you always have to be increasing. This continues around the table until all the players have passed, and then the player who last played any cards is going to be the one to win that trick, taking all those cards into their discard pile, and then also starting the following trick. This is really good for that player because the end of the round is going to be triggered once a single player is able to get rid of all the cards in their hand, so each player is rushing to try and do that. And if you are the first one to do it, you're going to be gaining points for the amount of cards that are left in your opponent's hands, as well as gaining points for the cards that you were able to claim from winning the various tricks. But at the start of each round, each player is also going to have a jack, a queen, and a king laid out in front of them, and these cards are actually going to be acting as wilds throughout the entirety of the round. So if you don't exactly have the cards that you need to create a particular set that you're trying to play, you can always use one of these wild cards. Of course, since these cards are face up in front of each of the players, all the other players will know how many of these you still have left in your possession. And even though these are left on the table, they still do count as the cards in your hand. So if you do want to be the first player to get rid of all the cards in your hand, you do have to get rid of these ones too. But aside from being dealt a hand of cards as well as these wild cards, players are also each going to get 3 different betting cards. And after each player has looked at their own hand of cards, each player is then going to have the opportunity to play one of these betting cards if they choose to do so. You could bid up to 30 points or you could bid nothing at all, but whatever bet you make, you will be winning that amount of points if you are able to be the winner of that round. But if you bet incorrectly, those points are going to be going towards your opponents. But like I said, that's not the only way to win victory points in this game, because all the players will also be gaining victory points for the tricks that they're able to win, because you're going to be taking all those cards that you won in those tricks, and any of the cards that are either a 3, 5, 7, 9, Jack, King, or Queen are going to be granting you a victory point. On top of this, not all the cards are used in a single round, so you're going to have a little bit of variation in the cards that come into play, but all the ones that aren't used are going to be left in a separate pile, and whichever player is the first to get rid of all their cards in a round is also going to be adding that pile into their discarded cards, adding to their score at this point in the game. Players can then either play the game over a set number of rounds, and in that case, the player with the most victory points at the end of those rounds is going to be the winner, or players can play up to a certain amount of victory points, and whoever gets to those victory points is going to be the winner of the game. But there is one more special thing to note about this game, and that's that there is a special type of set that any player can play on any trick, and that is the bomb set. And in order to form this set, you need to play a 3, a 5, a 7, and a 9, and they either have to be all the same suit, or they have to be each different suits. Playing a bomb can immediately end the current trick, and it does allow you to start the next one, but unlike normally when in a trick, you don't actually get to keep the cards in that previous trick. Like I said, there are going to be a couple different variants in this new version of the game, but if you are interested in this one, you can check it out in the link down below. But we do also have Tricktakers. And Tricktakers is a game for 2 to 5 players. It takes about 30 to 40 minutes to play. In this game, players are going to be playing as different characters with different effects and abilities, and this game actually offers you with 3 different ways that you can win the game. You could either be the first player to gain 2 gold crowns, the first player to gain 3 black crowns, or you could try to complete your character-specific win condition, which usually does require you getting a certain amount of points, but each character is going to be scoring points a little bit differently. The trick taking in this game does follow your more traditional trick taking, where there's going to be a lead player leading with a particular suit. All the other players are required to follow that suit if they're able to do so, but in this game the suits are going to be represented by colors, and it's always the black card that's going to be acting as trump. But what makes this trick-taking game very different from a lot of other trick-taking games that I've seen is because this one also introduces the idea of colorless cards. These are going to be represented by the white cards, but what makes these interesting is that since they don't have a color at all, you can actually play these into any trick that you want at any point in the game. One of these colorless cards is just worth less than any other card in the game, so with that one you're just trying to get rid of it at the first opportunity that you can, but then the other colorless card is actually worth more than almost every other card in the game, even the trump card, unless it is the berserker card, because the berserker card is trump, but it's worth more than even the colorless cards. But a really interesting concept that comes along with these colorless cards is that if a player leads with a colorless card, since it's colorless, it's not going to be setting the suit for that trick. Instead, it's going to be the first colored card that gets played that's going to be setting that suit, and then all the other players will have to follow that card. So in this trick-taking game, it's not always the lead player that's setting the suit of a trick. And then any players that were able to not win a single trick will be winning one of the black crowns, and then players will just be gaining points based on the tricks that they won and the way that their specific character scores. The game continues like this for 3 rounds, and if a player is able to get 2 gold crowns, then they win the game, or if a player is able to get 3 black crowns, then they win the game. Otherwise, it's the player with the most victory points at the end of the game that wins based on their specific character's scoring. And if you're interested in this one, you can check it out. I do have links to the campaign in the description below. Also on the 12th, we have Flock Together, and this plays 1 to 5 players and takes about 25 to 125 minutes to play. And I really love the theme in this one because in this game, players are going to be playing as chickens, working together cooperatively to try and fight off different predators over 3 different rounds. And if you're able to defeat the final boss, then the players win the game. But a really cool feature about this game is the way that your character actually works, because each player is going to be starting the game as a baby chick, and you're actually going to be using this booklet and growing your chick and gaining new abilities throughout the game, and you're going to be turning the pages as you level up. But it doesn't stop there, because the same can be said for the predators as well. And like I said, you're going to be fighting a different predator each and every round. But I should actually say that a new predator is going to be introduced every single round. So if you're not able to defeat the predator in the round that it appeared, then it's going to be coming back in the following rounds as a stronger form, because that predator is also going to be growing as well. Each round does also represent a change in season, so you're also going to be facing different events and different weather events that might limit your movement or the actions that you can take. And this is an action selection game because on your turn you'll be able to perform 2 out of 8 possible actions. Some of these actions will occur on the farm itself, while some of them do have you venturing off. You could use an action to go off the farm to forage for food, which you can then bring back to heal other players or heal yourself. Or you could use an action to lay eggs, which you can use to revive other players. And you can also use actions to move, draw ability cards, level up your chicken, or even attack the predators. And you could attack either one of the active predators, and if you are able to defeat them, you do get a nice loot drop with an item that will grant you some special effects. Or instead, you could go and attack some of the critters that you might find around the farm. Combat is resolved quickly just using dice rolling, and if you are able to defeat any of the smaller creatures, you do get a small benefit for that, but there is always a chance for a negative effect depending on what you roll. The game continues like this over 3 seasons, and if players are able to defeat all the predators, and then also take out that final boss, and they win the game. And if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I have it linked in the description below. And also launching on September 12th, we have Rivals, and this plays 2 to 6 players and takes about 40 to 120 minutes to play. And this one is a competitive deck building battle royale. And in this game, each player is going to be starting with a near identical deck, except you're going to be adding in your 2 specific character cards because each player is also going to be playing as a specific character with their own ultimate ability, and each player is going to be starting with their own character board. The board is going to be tracking your health, your ultimate gauge, which is going to be increasing each time you deal out damage, and once that's maxed out, you can activate your ultimate ability. And there's also going to be a track to track your points throughout the game, and that's one way that you can win if you're able to accumulate 5 points. But then there's also going to be a few empty spaces on your board where you can play different skill cards in order to make additional upgrades to your character. But it's not just your character and your deck of cards that players are going to be concerned with, because there's also a main board that players are going to be able to explore, and each player will have a token out on the board representing their character and where they're located on the board currently. And the game plays over a series of turns, with each player having 2 action points that they can spend on their turn, but there are a lot of free actions that you can perform as well, so you can actually do quite a lot on a single turn. Some of the actions you can perform are to move around on the board, but in order to move, you do need to reveal the tiles around you first, and there is an action for that, and it's going to be revealing any of the tiles that are adjacent to the current tile that you're located on, and each tile is made up of 3 hexes. Players can also use an action to collect the resources that are located on that specific tile, and whenever you do that, you do put a drought token on it that's going to temporarily disable any player from being able to take resources from that tile in the following turn. But there's a total of 6 different locations that can be discovered on a given hex, and these can even allow you to do things like trade with merchants in order to gain new cards, or even perform some special specific abilities if you're able to combine a location with a specific card in your hand. But the cards are another place where you can spend your action points, because there's a whole bunch of different cards that you can have in your hand, and they range across 3 different types. There's attack cards that do have a cost in order to play, but they can also deal a certain amount of damage at a certain range, and they can come in either physical, mental, or explosive types. Mental attacks don't need direct line of sight, and explosive attacks can actually have a splash effect. But anytime that a player is attacked, they also have the opportunity to roll their defense dice to try and limit the amount of damage done to them. But other than the attack cards, there's also tactical cards that allow you to perform special actions or effects. And then there's finally the skill cards, which when played, they go directly on your board and can grant you permanent special abilities. Some of these cards might require you to use resources in order to either play them or activate their effects, but having resources does grant you with some other options as well, and most of these are free actions. You can either spend resources to gain anticipation tokens, and whenever you spend these tokens, it allows you to re-roll your defense dice if you don't like the results that you got. Or you could also spend resources to build a shield around your character, adding some additional defense to them. Or you could use these resources to remove cards from your hand in order to try and get cards that you do need at that particular time into your hand. Or you could also spend them to gain legendary cards, which are just more powerful cards that you can add to your hand, and they're much more powerful than the cards that you start with. And then finally, you can use those resources to gain rival points, which, like I said, is one of the ways to win the game. But after each player has performed their actions, that's going to be triggering the end of the round. And there's a few things that happen here, and one thing is really interesting because the main playing board is actually going to shrink. you're going to be drawing one of these cards, and it's going to indicate which section of the board is going to be removed. This is going to limit the play area and cause players to get closer and closer together, which of course is going to make the board more dangerous and trigger more and more combat. Players will then discard any cards that they didn't play and then draw back up to their hand. The game continues like this over a series of rounds until either a player is able to get enough points to win the game, or if they are the last player standing. Really interesting game here. If this one sounds fun to you, you can check it out. I have links in the description below. Also launching on September 12th, we have one that I'm really excited about, and this one is called Mythic Mischief. And this plays 1 to 4 players competitively and takes about 45 to 90 minutes to play. And in this game, players are playing as students in an enchanted library. Players are all going to be trying to sneak around the library, trying to collect the tome cubes of their color, which they can then use to upgrade their characters. But then they're also trying not to get caught by the tome keeper, while simultaneously trying to get the other players caught, because anytime that you get another player caught by the tome keeper, that's going to be earning you a victory point for the end of the game. And this is a game that's going to be playing over 2 rounds, and each player is going to be playing as their own asymmetrical factions, controlling multiple units out on the main board. Each player is going to have access to the same set of actions, but these actions are going to be working a little bit differently depending on the faction that you are. And then each player is also going to have a special ability with their faction. Each faction will also have a more powerful second ability, but that only gets activated once you've reached the second round. Players are going to be drawing a card and then setting up the main board according to that card. This is going to dictate where the tome keeper is going to be starting out on the board, as well as 3 different locations where that tome keeper is going to be moving to, but it also dictates all the other object locations as well, like where your tomes are going to be located, as well as the different library shelves, which can be moving through it around because, of course, this is an enchanted library. And on a player's turn, they're going to be trying to spend all their action points in order to do a few different things. The first thing is that you want to collect your tome cube so that you can upgrade your character for your following turns. Then you're also trying to manipulate the board in various ways, moving around the shelves or the tome keeper or even the other players in order to try and create an environment where the other players get caught instead of yourself. Players are going to have a number of dice located on their own personal player board, and the number on that die indicates how many actions you have to perform of that specific action row, and the number is always set to the location where that die starts. But the nice thing about getting the tomes is that you can actually place them on the left-hand side of the dice, pushing out the dice that you have there and pushing those numbers up, meaning that you do get more action points for that specific row. And some of the different actions that you can perform could allow you to do things like move the shelves around, swap places with other players, or even push or pull the other characters in different directions. Once you've performed all the actions that you can on your turn, or all the actions that you want to perform on your turn, it moves on to the following player. But before that happens, the Tome Keeper is going to get activated. When that happens, you're going to be looking at the next location that the Tome Keeper is trying to move to, and then the Tome Keeper is going to get a certain amount of movement points in order to move towards that location. The objects and the shelves in the Tome Keeper's way can manipulate the path that the Tome Keeper is going to be taking, so hopefully you're able to manipulate all of that so that the Tome Keeper does end up on the same space as another player, and if that ever happens as the Tome Keeper moves, that player is going to get booted off the board. They can come back on later, but then you're also going to be gaining a victory point for that. Players continue taking turns just like this until the Tome Keeper reaches that third spot. Then that's going to be triggering the end of the first round, and at that point you're going to be flipping that setup card over to the other side and then resetting the board according to the new parameters, and they're going to be playing the game exactly the same, except now each player is going to have their more powerful special abilities available to them. The game continues like this until the end of the second round, and then the player with the most victory points at the end of the game wins the game. And if you are interested in this one, you can check it out. I have links in the description below. Also launching on September 12th, we have another exciting one because this one is from Chip Theory Games, and it's called Hoplomachus Victorum. And this is a solo game that takes 90 minutes to play. And in this game, you're going to be choosing one of the many gladiators to play as. And then you're going to be playing over 4 acts, trying to train and level up and defeat a specific champion each and every act in order to earn the right to go up against the final most powerful champion. But every act, players will only have 12 weeks at their disposal in order to spend training and exploring the world, and eventually fighting and defeating that specific champion for that act, and if they're not able to do that, then they will immediately lose at that act. And the main way that players are going to be leveling up throughout this game is by visiting the various locations on the map, because each location is going to be associated with a specific deck of cards, and each of these cards represents different types of events, and some of these events could trigger you going into training exercises where you can level up and recruit new units, while other events might have you encountering hostile opponents, and if you defeat them, you'll earn points that you can spend to level up on your own personal player board. But of course, there can just be all sorts of other events as well that just have a whole range of effects and options for players to choose from. But anytime that you're resolving one of the combat events, you're going to be going to the associated combat board, and there's 8 different boards, adding a lot of variety into the game because each of them do play a little bit differently and have different effects and options to choose from. But you'll be drawing your opponent chips from a bag, and at the start of the game, the bag has just very basic units, and then you'll be deploying them out on the board and then also issuing out your own chips. You're then going to be alternating back and forth between your turn and the enemy's turn, deploying different units, issuing attacks, and rolling dice in order to make those attacks depending on the stats that are located on your specific unit's chip. The different units can have a variety of stats that indicate their movement points, their attack power, their accuracy, and some of them can even have some special abilities as well. Some of the encounters can also put various items out on the main board that either the enemy or the players can take into their inventory and use during the battle. And each of the enemies will have different movement and attack patterns depending on the type of unit that they are. With every battle that a player has, you're going to be adding a new elite unit chip into the enemy's unit bag, which means that you have a higher likelihood of drawing more difficult units as the game goes on. But if the combat that you're in was triggered by the training event, then it is considered a skirmish against friendly gladiators, and you will be able to recruit one of them at the end of that battle. But you can only recruit the ones that you don't accidentally kill, so you do want to try and win this battle without causing any casualties. The game continues like this, and if you're able to defeat each of those champions as well as that final champion, then you win the game. But in addition to the main game, this new campaign is going to be introducing 3 new expansions. The first expansion is going to be called the Pandora's Ruin expansion. It's going to be adding a bunch of new modules that you can mix into the game. There's going to be 3 new final boss champions that you can play in any of your campaigns. There's also going to be new mechanisms for fighting those champions, as well as new mechanisms introduced to each of the arenas. Not only that, but this expansion also introduces a new way to play the game with a variant that allows you to play the game significantly faster. The Pandora's Wake expansion is going to be introducing a whole new faction of gladiators that you can encounter and recruit and probably also play as, but it's also going to be introducing 2 new arenas with their own mechanisms and boards that you'll also be able to mix into the game. And then finally, there is Pandora's Might that's just going to be adding a bunch of new heroes that you can play as in any of your campaigns. And if this one does sound interesting to you, you'll definitely want to check out the campaign because you'll get a few other items added to the game with this micro expansion. And if you are interested to check it out, I do have it linked in the description below. Also launching on the 12th, we have Fromage, and this plays 1 to 4 players and takes about 30 to 45 minutes to play. And I'll just come out and say it that this one is my own personal pick of the week. And I have a few reasons for that. First off, I absolutely love the theme on this one. This is called Fromage, so as you expect, players are going to be playing as cheesemakers. You're going to be creating all sorts of gourmet cheese, and I absolutely love the artwork that goes along with it, and of course the cute little meeples that players will be using to build up their creamery throughout the game. But another thing that I like about this one is that this is not only a worker placement game, but it's also a simultaneous worker placement game, which means that all players are going to be doing their worker placement at the same time. And the reason that this is possible is because the board is going to be split up into 4 different areas, and you can only put your workers in the area that's in front of you. But you might be wondering, if you can only interact with the section that's in front of you, how do you ever interact with the other areas of the board? And the answer to that is that this is also a lazy Susan. So after every single round, you're going to be rotating that board and putting a new section in front of you. And I really like the way that this is done in this game, because unlike a lot of other games, this one doesn't feel so much like a gimmick, because it does actually serve a very functional purpose in this game. Because on your turn, you'll be able to place out 1 or 2 workers. You'll be able to put 1 worker in the bottom section and 1 worker in the top section. For any of the workers that you put in the bottom, you're going to be putting your colored cheese there first, indicating that you're going to be creating that type of cheese. And then you need to assign the worker matching that cheese type in order to make that cheese. But some cheeses will take longer to age than others in order to complete that cheese, and you only get your worker back once that cheese is properly aged. And the way that this is represented is by the rotation of the board, because each of these cheeses is facing a different direction, and the direction it faces indicates how long it's going to take to create that cheese, because you only get your worker back once your worker is facing towards you. So if you place a worker that's directly away from you, you're not going to get it back until it fully rotates 180 degrees so that that worker is facing you. I'm normally not a fan of players having their own spot where they put workers on their turn, because it does make games normally feel like more of a competitive solo game. But the reason that I like the way that it's done in this game is because even though you are sectioned to your own spot to put your workers on your turn, you still are dealing with the consequences of the other players, because the cheese that they make there and the orders that are already completed are going to be taking up spaces of the board, and each of these 4 locations are going to be representing 4 different venues that have different ways that they score and different objectives that players are going to be trying to achieve. What's really cool about these locations is that they are triple layered, which means that you can slide a board into it, creating more variety and different board configurations every time you play the game. And you can also put these boards in different orders, which can also change up the feel of the game as well. I really love the combination here with rotating the board to get access to new locations, but then also using that rotation to indicate when you get your worker back, because I feel like they're taking full potential of this lazy Susan and making it very, very streamlined and easy to play. But like I said, whichever location you're currently placing your workers at, you do have to deal with the decisions and consequences made by the other players, because these different spaces are going to be slowly filling up with each of the players' cheeses, because as players are putting out those cheese, they actually stay there for the rest of the game. And some of these locations are going to be scoring based on area control and the amount of your color that you have in a specific region, while others might be scoring depending on completing different orders and tables, or even scoring based on completing different patterns and having your colored cheese adjacent to each other. But like I said, you can place up to 2 workers on your turn, but there's a few reasons why you may not want to do that. First off, you're going to be limiting the amount of workers that you have, and you do want to try and make cheese as much as possible because you are racing against the other players. But if you feel like you do have an extra worker, you can use that second worker to place at the center of the board within your quadrant. And that's going to be earning you the associated special resource, which can either be a order card, which if you fulfill it will grant you some additional points at the end of the game, or it can grant you some fruit which you can infuse and augment your cheese with, or it can also allow you to upgrade your creamery, which I will get to in a second. And finally, it can also grant you milk, which is really nice to have, because even though you can play 2 workers, like I said, only one can be played in the bottom and only one can be played at the top of the quadrant. But if you spend your milk, that allows you to make more cheese, and you can actually place both of your workers at the bottom. This is really nice, allowing you to get to multiple places before your opponents have a chance. And it also speeds up the end of the game, because each player is only limited to 15 cheese tokens for the entirety of the game, and once a single player runs out of all those tokens, that's going to be triggering the end of the game. But like I said, each player does have their own creamery that they're going to be managing throughout the game and also using to track their available resources. And there's going to be a few different things going on here. The first one is that you'll be able to build different structures on your creamery in order to unlock special abilities. You'll also be able to generate milk from your various livestock in order to create more cheese, like I had just mentioned. And you can also have an area to grow different types of fruit that you can use to infuse your cheese with. And then the bottom of the board is where you're going to be putting any of your completed order cards. But the interesting thing here is that whenever you complete an order card, it's always going to be associated with one of the cheeses that you put out on the main board. There's 4 different locations out on the main board, so of course there's 4 different locations located at the bottom of your player board. Anytime you complete an order, you're going to be putting it underneath the location where you completed that order. And then at the end of the game, you're going to be earning points equal to the square of that number. So if you have 2 cards there, you're going to be earning 4 points. If you have 3 cards there, you're going to be earning 9 points, so on and so forth. So the more cards that you have stacked there is going to be increasing your victory point potential exponentially. Really interesting game here. I think it has quite the potential to be a real hit. I love seeing new Euro games that look really, really well designed, but then also bring in some new ideas as well. And I think this one is checking off all those boxes. I'm really excited for this one, and if you are too, you can check it out in the description below, and of course, click to get notified. And also launching on the 12th, we have a new expansion to the war game ONUS, and this one is called Under the Eagle. And this plays 1 to 6 players and is a war game where players are going to be going through a campaign where they're going to be commanding either the Roman Empire or their enemies. And you're going to be going through a whole array of battles ranging from small skirmishes all the way up to full-fledged wars. In this game, you're actually going to be using your cards to represent your different units out on the main board, and players are going to be alternating back and forth, going through a few different phases to play their order cards, move them around and activate the units, and then issue attacks with your activated units to any units within range, and then you're also going to have an opportunity to retreat. Of course, there is a lot more to the game than just this, but essentially players are going to be alternating back and forth, going through those various phases until there's only one player standing, and then that player wins the game. And if you're interested in this one, you can check it out. I have links in the description below. Also launching on the 12th, we have another expansion. This one is for the game Endangered, and I literally just found this one before filming the video, so I didn't get a lot of opportunity to go into detail and research this one. But this one is going to be called Endangered American Red Wolf Scenario, and this is going to play 1 to 5 players and take about 60 to 90 minutes to play. But if you're not familiar with this game, this is a cooperative game where players are going to be working together, acting in different roles in order to save a specific animal from extinction. The original had you saving the endangered tigers, while in this one you're going to be trying to save the American red wolf. In order to do this, players are going to be using their actions to try and influence the United Nations and also stop the environmental destruction. There's a bunch of characters that players can play as, each with their own unique actions and abilities. There is a zoologist, a philanthropist, a TV wildlife host, a lobbyist, and even an environmental lawyer. Each turn, players are going to be rolling their dice and then assigning those dice to the various action cards in order to perform those actions. But after all the players have taken their turns, any mating pairs of the endangered animals are going to reproduce and create that situation a little bit better. And then also the destruction tiles will enter the board, possibly killing some of the animals that already exist there. Players are going to be walking this balance and trying to tip the scales in their favor, and if they are able to save the animals, then they win the game. And another thing that I just discovered by pulling up this Kickstarter page is that there's also going to be a scenario where you'll be able to save endangered penguins. So if you love wolves or if you love penguins, this is definitely one to check out, and I have links in the description below. And now launching on September 13th, we have Rolling Zombies, and this is a campaign that I did think was launching a week or a couple weeks ago, so I did already cover this one, and I'll just go ahead and roll that previous footage for you now. And this one is a competitive 4X survival game where players are going to be able to expand and fight against each other, as well as the zombies that are scattered across the land. The game's going to be played on a main board where players are going to be able to explore different regions on the board, reveal new locations, and also use those locations to generate resources and claim ownership to the surrounding land. But the thing that I think is really cool about this game is that there's 13 actions outlined along the side of the board, and each player is only allowed to do each of those actions once in the entire game, which means that the maximum amount of turns that you have in this game is, of course, 13, because that's as many actions as there are. But the other thing about performing actions in this game is that each of those actions is actually going to be associated with a certain combination of dice, and in order to perform that action, you need to roll that combination of dice. On your turn, you're going to be able to roll 5 dice, and then you'll be able to optionally re-roll any amount of those dice up to 2 times. You'll then spend those dice to perform an associated action. And like I said, there are 13 actions, and they do come in different forms, and some do overlap with each other, but essentially you're going to be using them to move around the map, visit or reveal new locations, use the location-specific actions to gain resources, pay to gain more units to put out on the board, fight zombies or the other players. And when you do attack, you will be using units that you do have deployed out on the board, including their attack and defense in the battle, but then also playing a combat card. Players will each deal damage to each other, attacking the weakest units first and gaining victory points for any units that they're able to destroy. The game continues like this, and at the end of the 13th round, players are going to be adding up all the points they got from each unit eliminated, from the hexes that they control at the end of the game, as well as bonus points for the player that gains the largest single area out on the board. The player that has the most victory points wins the game, and if you want to check it out, I do have it linked down below. And the next campaign we have is launching on the 16th, and this one is called Deep Six, a Game of Galactic Mayhem. And I couldn't find a whole bunch of info on this one, but it does play 2 players, and it takes about 15 to 30 minutes to play. And in this game, each player is going to have their own leader character, as well as a bunch of other units as well. But the main board is going to be set up with a bunch of different tiles, and the different colors represent either one player's territory or the other player's, or either a neutral territory that can be claimed by either player easily, but you can also defeat units in your opponent's territory to take that for yourself as well. On a player's turn, they'll be placing their units onto the various tiles and expanding their territory, and also issuing combat against their opponents by rolling dice and trying to defeat those units to take that territory for themselves. Players can also gain powerful glyph cards for special abilities and one-time effects that they'll be able to use to their advantage, and each round there will also be different events that can occur that can shift the tiles around and cause a little bit of disorder that the players will have to work with. Not a whole lot more info on this one, but it is really interesting with the way that the territory works and the way that it's tracked, and it looks like there's a bunch of different ways that you can set up the board, adding a lot of variety from game to game. So if this one does sound interesting to you, you can check out their website, which will link to their campaign, and I'll have that linked in the description below. And those are all the campaigns I have for you this week, but don't leave yet because we still do have an awesome giveaway to announce, and this one's going to be for a pledge for Galaxy Postman. And if you're not familiar with this one, this is a dice worker placement game where players are going to be upgrading their ship and using it to make different deliveries of different items to different areas on a board, but then also picking up aliens who need a ride and bringing them to where they need to go. Anytime you do this, you're going to be gaining different resources and victory points. The game has a really neat action board which represents your ship, and you'll be able to upgrade the hexes and actions that are available there. And each time you perform an action on a specific hex, it's also going to be associated with a secondary action, allowing you to perform multiple actions on your turn and creating good decisions between which pair of actions you want to perform. To enter this giveaway, all you have to do is leave a comment down below, and you can say anything you want, but if you're looking for something in particular, maybe you could let us know what you would name your delivery ship. For myself, I guess I gotta go on brand and call it the Shelf Express. I couldn't think of any puns. Good luck in the giveaway, and that's the only one I'm going to announce this week, but I do have a bunch more giveaways lined up, and I'm going to be announcing mostly all of these next week because next week we have a ton of games lined up already, so why not have a ton of giveaways as well? And some of those giveaways are going to be for Isofarian Guard, as well as Mycelia, and even Rogue Angel, and definitely a bunch more as well. So if you don't want to miss out on an epic giveaway, definitely subscribe down below and tune in on next week's episode. And I run all these giveaways the exact same way. All you got to do is leave a comment down below. You don't have to like or subscribe or do any of that. But if you do find this content useful and you think I deserve it, I do appreciate it, and it is a free way to help me out. But if you do want to get notified of these videos, you can also click that bell icon down below, and that'll give you a notification every time one of these videos goes up. I only post one a week right now, and it goes up sometime on Saturday, so the notifications could actually be useful because I'm not very consistent with the exact time. But let's go ahead and draw the winners for last week's giveaway, which was for a pledge for Potions of Azerland, which is over on Kickstarter now. You can check it out if this one looks interesting to you. But I use this fancy application here to draw a winner. All these extra names down here are bonus entries from my Patreon subscribers. If you do like this content and you are in a position to do so, I really do appreciate any support over on the Patreon. It is making a huge difference for me right now because these videos do take a lot of time and effort. I don't have a lot of that right now, and I'm also at a point in my life where I'm on a very strict budget, so if it wasn't for all the supporters here, I'd probably have to spend my time elsewhere in order to make ends meet. So it makes me feel very, very fortunate that I'm able to offer the value that I do, but also that there's so many amazing people like all of you out there that are also putting their skin in the game and just helping out all this effort here. But let's go ahead and draw those comments and draw the winner for Potions of Azerland. And the winner is Zoltan, who is one of our Patreon subscribers. So I'll reach out to you and let you know that you won yourself a pledge for Potions of Azerland. Congratulations on the win, and that is everything I have for you this week. Ooh, there's a new episode of Wheel of Time. I'll definitely be checking that out. So I'm excited to watch that. I've watched the first season, and I've been watching the second season. That's just been coming out on Amazon Prime, and I'm really, really enjoying it. Great show. Almost reminds me of Game of Thrones, but without being so lewd. For better or worse, I hope it at least has a better final season. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, keep that shelf cluttered and the table full.